We're going to take a look at the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden. This book's a little on the older side, but it's one of my favorites. I think I've read it about 3 times. I think that one of the challenges for psychology in a general sense, relative to other sciences, is you have to come up with operational definitions for things. So you have to create concepts and then create how you're defining the concept. So let's say, for example, you want to test people's confidence. You have to create a definition for confidence that is you can quantify in terms of behavior. So you might measure confidence in terms of eye contact and say that that's confidence. And so what you have to do is you have to create labels and categories of things that are human characteristics and then build off of that. And it's all, you use the scientific method, but one of the challenges is defining things and coming up with what concepts are important and how we should think of them. And I think Nathaniel Branden does that a really good job with that for self-esteem, specifically towards the end of increasing your own self-esteem and having an actionable way of looking at self-esteem where you have your own sense of agency and you can help develop your own self-esteem. So, really quick, let's take a look at what the 6 pillars are. They are the practice of living consciously, the practice of self-acceptance, the practice of self-responsibility, the practice of self-assertiveness, the practice of living purposefully, and the practice of personal integrity. And so, the first thing that should stand out is they're all practices. And that is in line with the philosophy of it being actionable stuff. And I'd like to read a little bit of an excerpt from him for where he sets out to define his own meaning of self-esteem, which for him, there are 2 concepts that are fundamentally important. Let's take a look. Self-esteem has 2 interrelated components. One is a sense of basic confidence in the face of life's challenges. This is self-efficacy. The other is a sense of being worthy of happiness, self-respect. I do not mean to imply that a person of high or healthy self-esteem consciously thinks in terms of these components, but rather that if we look closely at the experience of self-esteem, we inescapably find them. Self-efficacy means confidence in the functioning of my mind, in my ability to think, understand, learn, choose, and make decisions. Confidence in my ability to understand the facts of reality that fall within the sphere of my interests and needs. Self-trust, reliance. Self-respect means assurance of my value, an affirmative attitude towards my right to live and to be happy, comfort in appropriately asserting my thoughts, wants, and needs, the feeling that joy and fulfillment are my natural birthright. So, what I think Nathaniel Branden does is he identifies 2 really important components. The belief that we are competent, right, self-efficacy, and then he used a different one in that particular passage, but he often refers to the second one as self-worth, which is the belief that we're worthy of happiness. And I think he hits the nail on the head with that, and then he goes to his 6 pillars, and those pillars are both, for him, manifestations of self-esteem, as well as ways you can get self-esteem. So it's a 2-way relationship where you are both gaining self-esteem by having these qualities, as well as if you have self-esteem, you're going to display these qualities. So let's take a look at the ratings for this book. For utility, I gave it an 8.5. This is largely because, in addition to just being theoretical, there's a lot of practical applicability in there. The pillars are practices. They're not some esoteric thing that's outside of reach, which, just to be clear, you can make a model in psychology that is more externally focused and perhaps describes the world in a better way in regards to self-esteem, but that wouldn't necessarily be as useful because you can't put it into action in terms of your own practice. So, another thing he has going for him for utility is in there he advocates for a mental exercise called sentence completion, which I actually think is a really good one. the way it works is you have a sentence stem, and what you do is you finish the stem in a notebook. So, for example, the sentence stem might be, if I brought 5% more attention to the practice of living consciously, then I would ... And so you finish the sentence, you finish it like 6 times as fast as you can, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to pull stuff from your mind in terms of how you would change your practice out from your subconscious and make it explicit to you. And the idea is that it helps you to implement these sorts of things in addition to bringing them to your awareness. So I like that a lot. For entertainment, I gave it 5.5. The book has some stories in it that are kind of neat, but overall it's not entertaining. One of the stories that was particularly striking is when he has a student of his stand up in a lecture and say, "I have a right to exist." And his whole point was that they couldn't say it, generally speaking, without a tone of defensiveness when he asked students to do this exercise, which is indicative of a lack of self-worth. Okay, so for interest, I gave it a 7.5. I think that just about everyone wants to have high self-esteem. It's hard to think of people who this isn't interesting for, but a lot of the ideas are not necessarily entirely foreign in terms of exposure. So it's interesting because it's something that's fundamentally human, but it's not a tremendously high score because, well, you've probably seen this before. Novelty, I gave it an 8. Again, a lot of this stuff is already explored, but I actually just think that this is the best way to look at self-esteem. And so I gave Novelty a good score, and I think missing out, because both self-efficacy and self-worth are so important for people, I think missing out on this book is perhaps worse than missing out on other books. For style, I gave it a 7. His writing style is pretty good. Maybe that's a little high. I'm not sure. I enjoyed it. Readability, I gave it a 9. There's a lot of... all the text and stuff is broken up in a way that makes it very easy to read. There's like quote asides, there's bullet points at the end of each chapter, I think. There's sentence stems for that particular practice. Overall, very well put together. For difficulty, I give it a 7.5. I don't think any of the ideas are not accessible, and okay, it's not like just a storybook that's fairly easy to read, but there we go. For overall, I gave it a 7.57, which ties for the highest I've ever given anything at this point in time. I'm not entirely sure it deserves quite that high, but I really like this book. I've read it 3 times, so I think it's tremendous. I also really like the quote that I used for the splash on the side, which is, "A disservice is done to people if they are offered feel-good notions of self-esteem that divorce it from questions of consciousness, responsibility, and moral choice." And I think that almost every self-help type of book or mode of thinking that is actually effective and useful leans heavily into the idea of taking responsibility for your own life. And that he creates a model of self-esteem that leans so heavily into that, I think is very significant. So as far as discussion goes, what do you think of the 6 pillars? And I'm always on the prowl for different ways of looking at things. If you have another model for self-esteem that you think is particularly good, please let me know, because I think it's a tremendously important concept, and I also think that the more models you can collect of something, the better. And so I'd be interested to hear. If you like this video, feel free to give it a like. If you are interested in seeing more videos, feel free to subscribe, and have a good one.